Hello friends, this video on diversity in living world part 6 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Let us see. So as I said, biodiversity, that means the variety of life forms existing on earth. So we are going to study about the entire variety. But we will have to find out a way to study that because the variety is huge. So why do we have this biodiversity? To maintain ecological balance on earth, because each of the living organism existing on this earth depend on one another for their survival, and that is why it is very important to preserve biodiversity. And how can we preserve biodiversity? By preventing species extinction. We should try to preserve as many variety of life as possible. We should not let species become extinct. So now, to study this huge variety of life, we will talk about nomenclature and identification. So these are the two techniques, or these are the two processes which actually help us in studying about the huge variety of life forms that exist on earth. So let us see what is nomenclature and what is identification. Nomenclature. It is the process of naming living organisms such that a particular organism is known by the same name all over the world. Let us think of an example. Let us suppose in a country, we have many different languages, right? So in every language, you call a particular thing by many different names, right? Maybe if you think of a pen. So in English, we call it a pen. But there are so many other languages which are spoken all over the world. In fact, in one country itself, you have so many different languages. So the same pen may be called by so many different names by so many different people around the world. So now if two persons from two different places come and meet each other and they want to discuss something about the pen, maybe the first person will be referring that object as pen, while the other person will be referring the same thing by some different name. So they both will not be able to understand with each other, so they will not be able to communicate. So what can be done? So we need a common platform. We need a common language which is understood by everyone. And that is why came up this system of nomenclature. So when I talk about life forms, I basically talk about the animals, birds, fishes, and so many microorganisms and so many different types of life. Now, each of these organisms is known to people with different names. So people in one country will call a lion as lion. People in some other country will call lion as something else. So a common system of naming living organisms was a need. That is why came this system of nomenclature, so that each organism can be given a specific name which will be common throughout the world. So everybody would know what that particular name belongs to which animal. Right? So that is why came up nomenclature, to make the study of these many varieties of living organisms simple. Okay, so nomenclature is clear. So now we have another thing called identification. So what is identification? Let's see. Describing an organism correctly so that the organism can be named. Now, in order to name an organism, so how will you name something? Now, in order to name something, you should know what it is, right? For example, if I ask you to write an essay on pen, so if you know something about pen, only then you can write an essay on it, right? Only if you know that what is a pen, what does it actually do? It helps us in writing, right? So only if you know that, if you have that knowledge on pen, only then you can write an essay on pen. So if you want to name a particular object, you should have some idea about what it is, so that you can give a name which has some so that you can give a meaningful name to that organism. So in order to name an organism, identifying that organism is very, very important. That means describing the organism correctly, studying that organism and describing some of the characteristics or some of the important features of that organism. That is known as identification. So which comes first? Identification comes first. So first you have to identify the organism, only then you can give a name to that organism. So nomenclature is possible only when identification is done, because when you identify, once identification is done, you know that organism. Now once you know that organism, you can give a suitable name to that organism. So nomenclature will always follow identification. Okay. So now the question is, what was the need for nomenclature and identification? I mean, why do we actually need to know about organisms and why do we want to name them? Now, as I mentioned before also, since people in different areas, they use different languages, so a common platform was needed. And that common platform was given by nomenclature. And also looking at the variety of life forms that we have around us. If you talk about animals, we have a huge variety. Again, if you talk about birds and insects, we again have a huge variety. Human beings, the microorganisms, and the aquatic life. So, and on top of that, we also have plants. So, things are huge. I mean, the variety is huge. So, it is each and everything is called or is known by a different name in different places. So, a system of nomenclature was a must. Now, when nomenclature is a must, we just cannot simply blindly name an object, right? We should know something about that organism, only then we can name it. So how do we know something? We know it by the process of identification. So there came the need for nomenclature as well as identification. So now let us see what is binomial nomenclature. So nomenclature is clear, right? It is nothing but the process of naming a living organism. So then what is binomial nomenclature? So here we have an additional term, binomial. So generally wherever we have this word bi, it means two. And nomial is something related to name. So that means two names nomenclature. Okay, let us see what it is. It is a system of providing a scientific name with two components to a living organism. So now what we do, what kind of name we give to a living organism? So nomenclature is the system of naming. So what kind of name should be given? The name should consist of two components, and that is known as binomial nomenclature. And what do we call that name? We call it as a scientific name. So the scientific name is universal. The scientific name remains same throughout the world, be it India, Africa, America, Europe. Everywhere the scientific name of an organism will remain the same. So this scientific name will consist of two parts or two components, and that is why it is known as binomial nomenclature. That is nomenclature with two parts of the name. This naming system was given by Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus was famous, he was popular because of this binomial nomenclature. He first started with this system of naming. Now what are these two components which form the scientific name? The first component is called generic name and the second component is called specific epithet. So these two parts together form a scientific name or a binomial name. So let us look at an example. So what is this which you see on the screen? It is a tiger, right? So tiger is a common name for this animal in English. Now this tiger might be called by many different names in different languages like Spanish, French, German, and also many other languages. So we needed a common name. So this common name will consist of two parts. So what is the scientific name of tiger? So its scientific name is Panthera tigris. So this is the scientific name of tiger. So you go to any part of the world and if you say Panthera tigris, everywhere Panthera tigris would mean a tiger. So what is Panthera? So Panthera represents the generic name. Tigris represent the specific epithet. Now, specific epithet basically is the species to which this animal belongs to. And the species here is tiger, right? And what is generic name? It denotes the genus to which this organism belongs to. Now, we will talk about genus and species in detail as we go ahead. But for now, you should understand that every scientific name will have two parts, or it will have two words. So one part is generic name, which denotes the genus to which this organism belongs to, and the second part is the specific epithet, which denotes the species of that particular animal, right? So every organism will have a scientific name, be it a tiger, a lion, human being, or any other organism. So now we will look at the universal rules of nomenclature. I mean, how are we going to name the different organisms? So there were a set of rules which were set, and they had to be followed to name any living organism. So let us have a look at those rules of nomenclature. So let us look at the first rule for nomenclature. Generally in Latin or Latinized, that means the name which we keep. For example, in the previous slide I told you, right, for tiger, the scientific name is Panthera tigris. So the words which actually form the scientific name, they are generally in Latin or they are Latinized. Like the term tigress, it is a Latinized word, written in italics or underlined. Now, how do we differentiate the scientific name from other words which are written around? So, if it is printed, then you will see it in italics, and if it is handwritten, then writing in italics is not possible. So, that is why it is underlined, just to differentiate it from the other words. The first word represents genus, while the second one denotes the specific epithet. As I said, every scientific name will have two parts. The first word will be genus and the second word would be specific epithet. Specific epithet denotes the species to which that organism belongs to, and genus represents the genus. Again, we will talk about that later. Genus starts with a capital letter while species with a small letter. So these are some of the basic rules to write the scientific name of any living organism. So let us look at some examples. So what do you see here on the screen? It's a mango. So mango is a common name in English. So how do we give, or what is the scientific name of mango? It is Mangifera indica. So that is the scientific name. Now how do we write? So that means the first word is genus, which will start with a capital letter. So this is how we will write Mangifera. This denotes the genus, and the second word is indica. So indica denotes species. So indica will start with a small letter and Mangifera will start with a capital M. So if you look at the word Mangifera, it is somewhat similar to mango. I mean, by looking at this word, you can say that, okay, it is derived from mango. When you look at indica, again, from where do we get these words? Sometimes these words are obtained from the particular area where they are mostly found. Sometimes they denote some features or some characteristic of that organism. So that is how these names are obtained. So how do we write it? If it is printed, it will be in italics. If not, if it is handwritten, then it has to be underlined. So similarly, for human beings, what is the scientific name? It is Homo sapiens. So where Homo denotes the genus and sapiens denote the species, right? So these are some of the rules of nomenclature. So now the question is it possible to give binomial names to all living organisms? Now, if I start naming organisms like this, I already told you, right, that there is a huge variety of organisms which live on this earth. So can we give binomial name to each and every organism? Now, in order to give that binomial name, I need to study each and every organism. So is that possible? Just think of the variety of life we have on this earth. So is it feasible to study each and every organism? Now, we just cannot give a name blindly. Now, studying this huge variety is not at all possible. So that is why giving binomial names to each and every living organism is again not possible. So what is the solution? So what is the point of having this system of nomenclature then? If we cannot give names to every living organism, so there is no point of introducing this system of nomenclature. So now the question is, what is to be done then? So after thinking over it, people came up with a solution, and that solution was classification. So what was done, instead of giving binomial names to each and every living organism, the huge variety of living organisms which exist, they were classified into different groups. Now once they were classified into different groups, all the organisms falling under a particular group were given a similar name. Right? For example, you consider your school. Now in your school, maybe thousands of students are there. Maybe the total strength or the total number of students in your school is, say, 3,000. Now it is very difficult for the principal of the school to remember the name of each and every student. So what will the principal do? He will divide the students into different classes. So now he has, say, 100 students in class 1, 100 students in class 2, 100 students in class 3, and so on. So now if he wants to refer to a particular student, right? Now maybe he has forgotten, he doesn't know the name of that student. But he can ask that student which class you belong to. So the student says, I belong to class 3. So now it is easier for that principal to find out his name. He can directly go to the register for class 3, so where he can see some 100 names. Now it is easier for him to find his name among those 100 names rather than finding his name among the 3,000 names. So classification will make things easier. So by classifying organisms into different groups, we really don't need to name each and every organism. We can give a name to a particular group, so that all organisms falling under that group can be referred by the same binomial name. So make sense? Okay. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.